Okay, so all that I'm going to do here is go over everything we've covered in section 4.3. We spent several days on this. The first thing we talked about was just a process for finding the derivative of an inverse function. The first step was to take the derivative of the original function. After you have the derivative of the original function, you're going to write 1 divided by the derivative of the original. Now, we also have a name for this. We call this the reciprocal of the original function's derivative. Last but not least, you need to do two things. You need to calculate the corresponding x value. Because the problem will give you a y. The problem will give you a y value. And finally, you need to plug in that x value. So let's go through one example. Let's let g be this function. If f of x is the inverse and f of 2 is 1, then what is the value of the derivative at 2? Well, f is the inverse of g. So the first thing we're going to need to do here is find the original function's derivative, which in this problem would be 3x squared plus 1. The second thing we're going to do is we're going to say, well, the derivative of the inverse of a y value would be 1 over 3x squared plus 1. Which means if we want to know the derivative of the inverse at 2, what we're going to do is say, well, if 2 is the y value, then 1 must be the x value. So I would get 3 times 1 squared plus 1, which would be 1/4, and that would be my answer. This is a guaranteed AP question. So it's very important that you understand how to do this process because it's a guaranteed multiple choice question. After that, we said, well, there are some specific inverse functions that come up all the time. So what we're going to do is learn some formulas for finding the derivative of inverse trig functions. To find the derivative of inverse sine, we would do 1 over the square root of 1 minus u, the inside stuff squared. And then don't forget the chain rule, multiply by du dx. To do the derivative of inverse cosine, you would just make that same formula that you had for sine negative. And then, of course, don't forget the chain rule. To get the derivative of inverse secant, you would do 1 over the absolute value of u, square root of u squared minus 1 times the derivative of the inside stuff. And inverse cosecant would just be the negative version of secant. This should be a u. Square root of u squared minus 1 times the derivative of u. Last but not least, inverse tangent would be 1 over 1 plus u squared times the derivative of the inside stuff. And inverse cotangent would be negative 1 over 1 plus u squared times the derivative of the inside stuff. And I will see you guys tomorrow.